was limited, certainly for me, and I thought for other men. So I spent a weekend taking everything I learned and used in my clinical practice, and so I'm going to change the model and created a model for a new men's group because I just wanted real friends. It was selfish. And I asked 11 guys in this small town up in North Idaho near the Canadian border, and they all said yes. And it was like, oh, wow, I got to really show up. If they're showing up, I got to do something.
Awe Genge, this is Mental Metals, hosted by Asego Toto.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Mental Metals. I'm your host, Asego Toto, and before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation. Things off. Can you tell us a bit about your early years and how you navigated the challenges of dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome in school?
Well, yeah, I'm glad to. I struggled in school, particularly elementary school, but I didn't know I had any of these things. It wasn't until I was in graduate school that I realized I was dyslexic, and I was taking this speed reading course, and the guy knew I was trying, but I wasn't getting any place. So he said, "Are you dyslexic?" And I said, "I don't think so." He said, "Can you do the cross crawl?" And I said, "What's that?" And it's your ability to cross laterally move, so to move your right leg and your left arm at the same time. So I got down on my fours, and I literally could not do it. And what I learned was that we start as babies moving unilaterally, right leg, right arm, but in our development, in theory, we shift to a cross-lateral movement. Well, when you don't do that, that sets up problems. One of the problems is your ability to read. So this was, it was in my early 20s. It was, after college and graduate school. Yeah, I was probably about 25. And so I went on a journey of healing that. And I healed a lot of that and certainly can crawl now and do a lot of things I couldn't do. And then, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, probably more 20 years ago, I realized I also always had Asperger's syndrome, which is now they're saying it's on the spectrum of autism, which whatever. And I went on to heal a lot of that. I already healed some of it, but I did some things to heal more of it. And that got better and better. My penmanship, which is one of the signs of Asperger's, is still terrible, which is, I can deal with. I mean, I type most things anyway. But one of the main symptoms of having Asperger's is a hard time socializing with people. And I did it in elementary school, and that started to change. And with all that, I realized that part of what affected both of those, maybe more my Asperger's, are just being stressed and tense, chronically tense. Mm-hmm. And I find that with a lot of guys. And fortunately, most guys don't have these conditions. But as guys, when we can relax our bodies and downregulate our stress, a lot of our problems or symptoms either go away or improve. And that was certainly the case for me.
Going back, in terms of speaking about that dyslexia and, as you said, Asperger's syndrome, which is seen as within the spectrum of autism, there is this stigma around mental health. And it's something that we don't look at per se. Would you, looking back now, would you say that the way that, in terms of dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome, in terms of treating it and seeing it that's part of something that it's need to be advocated about, would you say it has changed?
Yes and no. So, at least in this country, I mean, I think it's good to have these distinctions. I mean, I know when I realized I had dyslexia and Asperger's, and then actually Lyme disease, which is another thing I healed, and that in some ways was easier once I healed that because that was more physical. You realize that, oh, my problems have some explanation. I think that's good. Now, what's not good and getting worse is in this culture, we like to diagnose everything and then treat it with drugs or a lot of behavioral things that really don't address the cause. So our culture is oriented towards dealing with symptoms and not dealing with a cause. So if you get a diagnosis of awareness and it leads to you addressing the underlying cause, great. But for a lot of people, it ends up just stigmatizing them, labeling them, puts them in a box, and then they're told that, oh, you gotta change that box, and that just makes it even harder because it's another added performance thing added on top of their current struggle. So I think a lot of it depends on how you frame it or utilize it. And for me, I've always chosen not to be labeled or limited by these things and actually find the advantage and the superpower in these, what some people will call disadvantages. And I see several gifts that come out of these challenges that a lot of people have.
You just mentioned something interesting, actually, and you are not the first person to just say this in terms of people that don't experience these things see it as a disadvantage, and whereas people that are going through these things see as a superpower, something that they can overcome. And I believe that as individuals, that sometimes when we don't have enough struggles, we become more lazier than people that are struggling in terms of certain mental illnesses. And something that you quite said in terms of comparing dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome with the limb disease, and whereas you said that as much as it was physical, it was easier to heal from. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so Lyme disease, started coming out, because I got it in high school and I'm 71. And so I got it when I was like 16, 17. So you can do the math. So it was quite a few years ago. And that's about when it came out in the northeast of the U.S. And they didn't know what it was. And for several decades, it just wasn't realized, or if it was realized, it was denied by allopathic or general medicine. And people were just considered wackos, just imagining things. And now Lyme disease is fully accepted and treated, even though it's unfortunately become more prevalent. And it's a hard disease to diagnose, particularly if you had it a while. And it's a very hard disease to treat if you had it a while. But with all my training in holistic health and alternative medicine and running an integrated medical clinic, my approach and my access to a lot of out-of-the-box therapies and ways of working was readily available for me. So as soon as I knew I had Lyme disease, I went on a very intense 6-month healing protocol that I created. I used other people and services to address killing the Lyme disease. And that most people would say, particularly after decades of having it, it'd be impossible to get rid of. But you give me something that's impossible and I'll probably do it. And so one reason I did it beyond wanting to do it for myself and dealing with my chronic fatigue, which is the main symptom I had, was, I just wanted a challenge that I could persevere through and win and show others that they could do the same. So once I sort of got rid of the Lyme disease, and then I got rid of what was making me always tired. Then I could rebuild my body. And that was a fairly consistent path that I pursued, where the more mental, emotional, behavioral conditions are a little more amorphic, and they're not caused by a certain pathogen, like, say, Lyme disease. Even though Lyme is hard to get rid of, if it's chronic, you can drive it down to a particular cause. There's a lot of secondary things that happen that you got to deal with too. But once you get the primary cause out, and then you can rebuild the body, where, say, with dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome, it's not like you got this one infection and you get rid of the infection, then you're fine. So with a lot of illnesses, or I don't call these illnesses or conditions, it's not that simple. But even if it's not that simple, it doesn't mean, if you're willing to work outside the normal box or medicine or therapy, that you can't heal these conditions or significantly improve them.
And moving on in terms to emotional health, men's emotional health, would you claim that by saying that through you have been persevering on having fighting these mentally and physical, I would say, obstacles in a way, contributed to you into being invested in men's emotional health?
Yeah, I was just saying to someone that I sort of joke, in some ways I think all guys have Asperger's syndrome emotionally. We're all, often behind the emotional curve compared to women. And it's not our fault, but for whatever reason we are. And having Asperger's, I was way behind any emotional curve. I was in the low percentile. So having Asperger's gives me empathy. Healing it has taught me a lot, about myself, about Asperger's, but more importantly about, how to help men rewire their emotional system and what really works and what doesn't work. And a lot of therapies out there are marginally successful at that. And so we get a lot of guys have tried a lot of things and then they want to get well. And they, use our approach, and they immediately find that within a week, working with us, they go, "Oh, I got more out of one session or a week, doing your class than I did a year or more of therapy." So one of the things that I found with my situations, and now, thousands of men I've worked with over the decades, is that we work with the somatics of the body and getting guys connected to their body experience and teaching them how to use their body experience to downregulate stress or relax and how to connect to themselves emotionally. It really works. Guys are open to it. They learn that quickly, and it generalizes into the rest of their lives pretty naturally.
And something that you said, that as you believe that as men, we have Asperger's syndrome in some type of way. And you mentioned when it came to emotions being behind compared to women. There's the stigma that men shouldn't show emotions. Men should be masculine, shouldn't show femininity, that side of not being feminine. And what your stance in that in terms of men's mental health? When I would say that in this road of recovery, in this road of healing, in a way, did you have any struggles when it came to mental health, and how did you, I would say, face them?
Yeah, I think, I certainly as a kid,